Okay, for this video we're going to start adding JavaScript into our HTML pages. JavaScript allows us to add some interactivity into our page, or create a dynamic page as it's sometimes called. Basically this means you can click on items and have certain functionality happen in your page. So I can click on buttons, or many different types of events can take place on the page, and based on those events we can attach functionality, JavaScript functionality, to occur when those events happen. This is called an event-based model. Okay, so the primary thing we're going to learn in this particular video is accessing the DOM. Okay, so we're going to create a new file, and this is going to be called JS DOM access. So what do I mean by the DOM? The DOM is the document object model, and basically all the DOM is the structure of your HTML document. So you can think of the document, all of your HTML tags, as an object, and the object itself has attributes and then also children, and then the children are the sub tags, right, the sub elements, and each one of those has attributes and sub elements, and so there's a hierarchy or an object structure or an object model. Okay, so that's all the DOM is. It's essentially your HTML document. Okay, so we can start a new page, JS DOM access.html. Alright, set the title, get a script tag or a style tag. I will set a background color. You can use 3 hexadecimal colors if you'd prefer, instead of the 6 that we normally do. Since I'm just using gray, that's fine. And then I'm also going to, under here, add a script tag. So inside the script tag is where our JavaScript can run. And in here I'm going to add a console.log. Okay, so this is our first script tag, and inside the style tags and the script tags, I like to unindent back to the beginning of the indentation of the file. That's a preference thing. You don't have to do that. But then I'm going to make another script tag down by the body. Okay, so there are 2 main places where people tend to add JavaScript into an HTML document. The first place would be up here in the head tag, somewhere in the head tag, and this JavaScript runs. Now keep in mind, as this HTML document is loaded by the browser, it's going to scan for elements. It finds the HTML element, then inside of that it scans and finds the head element, and then it finds the script element. As soon as it finds the script element, all of these elements are found in order as they are defined on the page. As soon as it discovers the script element, it starts processing the JavaScript before it finishes with the rest of these elements. So if in this script tag I want to reference some elements in the body of my page, I won't have access to them, and that's what I'm going to show you. That's why having the script here at the bottom of your body tag is so important. This script here is for interacting with elements on the page after your page is loaded. If I have that stuff up here in this script tag right here, then I won't be able to access anything, because those don't officially exist yet as far as the browser is concerned. The page hasn't completely loaded, right? So we're going to have a script tag down here, and this is going to be console.log starting script tag 2. Okay, and then we'll just put a little H tag so we have some text here. And page heading. an ID on this, page heading. Okay, so notice the only thing I have in my body tag is this H tag, and then the script tag is the very last sibling of the children of the body. Okay, so everything within the body will have loaded when this tag executes. Whereas up here, when this tag executes, nothing in the body exists yet. All right, so let's open this up in a browser, take a quick peek. Right, and there's not much here. Page heading looks good. And if we open up the developer tools, which you can go to settings and go to more tools, or you can get Control-Shift-I, we see that both of these tags have successfully started. So the browser found them in order. The first tag was encountered first, and then it ran that JavaScript. And then the second tag was encountered after it found these elements and rendered them. Then we had access to the next script tag. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this. We're going to try to access this DOM heading page, or this DOM heading element, and we're going to change the text inside of it. Okay, and we're going to try to do that 2 places, and we're going to see that it's not going to work up here. So to access a DOM element, we need to use the function document.getElementsById. Okay, so this will return one specific element. Each element on your page should only have one, should not share an ID, right? If you have an ID added to a single element, that should be unique to that element, to any other elements on the page, right? So when I say document.getElementById, there should only be one result. This should return this HTML element because this HTML element has ID page heading. I believe if you do have 2 elements with the same ID, it will return the first one, but you shouldn't ever have 2 elements with the same ID. Okay, so we're going to get page heading, and we're going to save that in a variable. And I'm just going to use let to declare all my variables for the sake of simplicity since we're just starting. So this is, I'm going to just call it L, EL for element. Close that and reload the page. Reload. Open this back up. Okay, and now we're going to console.log and see what's contained in this element. So I'm going to label it EL, just so the console will tell me what variable I'm trying to look at and see what's inside, and then as the second argument for console.log, I'll pass in the actual variable name. So it's going to look in that variable and see what's there and print it out to the console. Okay, so the result of getElementById with page heading, which this is the correct ID, at this point, when the page is loading, is none. It cannot find that element. Okay, so what we can do is we can copy and paste this down to the bottom section here, the bottom part of our second script tag here, and we're going to just the exact same code. Now we're going to try to access page heading. Okay, but this should be after the browser has found this and loaded this element. Oh, I already declared the element up there, so we go, since it's already declared, we'll just say, we'll reassign it. There we go. So now we see instead of the first time element was null, this time element is, it's found. And Chrome is kind of nice where if I highlight this, it actually highlights it as if we were in the elements section of the developer tools, where I can, highlight individual DOM elements like this. So this is the page heading under the elements section. If I go to console and I've printed out an HTML element, right, it allows me to access it in a similar way. Right, so we do see that as the page heading, and it's only accessible in this bottom part, this bottom script at the very bottom of body. Right, so the browser has to have read this and loaded this before we can access it to start manipulating it. Okay, so that's important. That's the main takeaway. So we're not going to do anything else up here with this script tag. We'll just leave that in there. but we will, now that we have this element, we're going to modify it a little bit. So what we can say is element.innerText. Okay, and you can do this with any elements that are not void elements, right? Any elements that can have child content. Okay, so innerText, and we can just change this to JavaScript DOM access. Okay, what this is going to do is going to take this element that currently says page heading, and it's going to replace the inner text of that HTML element, right? The inner text being this, right? And it's going to replace it with this string data. Okay, so don't forget our semicolon and refresh the page, and sure enough, we were able to modify that. We couldn't do it up here because we didn't get any element back. Okay, so that's important to note. All right, so that is getting an element by ID, document.getElementById. Now there's a few different ways to get elements. Okay, this is a very common one, get element by ID. Let's take a look at adding some additional functionality here. So let's add a button. There's a couple different ways you can add a button. The input control is a very versatile HTML element. If you change the type property, there's a list of lots and lots of different input controls you can use by selecting a particular type. Input, by default, I believe, is the text control, right? But we're going to add a button. Okay, and then the text inside of the button you can specify with value, the value attribute. Okay, now the input control does not have any children. Okay, so we can say the value here would be alert. So this is going to create a button that just says alert on it. Okay, and that's it. We haven't attached any functionality to it. It'll just show up as the button. Okay, so there's our button, and the browser has styled it rather plainly, but you see as you hover over it, it outlines. When I click it, it depresses, and you can kind of tell, you get some feedback of the type of interaction you're giving the button there. Okay, but we haven't attached any function to that yet. All right, so what we can do is we can go down to our JavaScript and we can define a function. Okay, so we can define a function a couple different ways. The first way is with the function keyword, and then the name, we'll call this alert1. And then left and right parentheses. If you have any arguments you want your function to use, you'd put them in here. But any function that we attach to an event, a DOM node, we don't want to have it take any arguments. With one exception, we might want to put an event object in here. But for now, we're going to leave that alone. So normally, whenever you have functionality attached to a DOM element, you do not have an argument. All right, so in here, console.log, just to test to see when this actually runs, we're going to say alert1 running. Okay, so this function is now defined. It has not been called. This is basically just telling JavaScript, okay, we have a function defined here. Now whenever you want to use it, we can use it. But this code inside of this JavaScript function will not execute until the function is called. If I wanted to call the function, I would call it like this. And I could call it multiple times. All right, so this should call it 3 times. Oh, that was alert, not alert1. So we're going to get to that alert1. There we go, alert1 running. Okay, so alert is a built-in function to JavaScript, which we're actually going to get to in just a minute. So we see that executed 3 different times, and if I remove these and reload the page, they don't execute at all. Okay, so it's very important to understand that this is a function definition, and that code does not run until you call the function. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have on an HTML element, specifically this button, we're going to attach functionality. So when the click event occurs, on click, we want this function to execute. We want to call this function alert1. So we'll say alert1 like that. Reload the page. Okay, so the function has not been called, right? But now every time I press alert, it logs. Now the console does not print it out repeatedly, so it doesn't fill up the console. It just shows you how many times that thing's been logged. And if I say console.log foo or something, it'll start over. If I log something else to the console. Oops. Now if I do it again, it'll start counting them again. Okay, so we've successfully attached functionality to this button here. Right? So maybe we'll call this log to console instead of alert. Log to console, and then our function name might be called log to console. Alright, and then here we have to change our function name, log to console, and then change that. So periodically you have to go through and change variable names, right? So make sure you change the variable name or the function name in every place where it's used. Okay, so there we go, log console, and there we go. That seems to be working. So now let's add another function. There's another way to create a function. Notice here with this function, there is no semicolon at the end. You do not need a semicolon at the end when you create a function like this. But you can also create a function and just store it in a variable. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. So I can create a variable name, and this one we can say is alert1, and we're going to set that equal to a function. Now this function has no name like this one. See, here we had function and then the name and then the parentheses. This is what's called an anonymous function. Okay, so we're defining a function here, and then that function is getting saved into this variable name. Okay, but because this entire statement is an assignment statement, we do need the semicolon if we create the function like this. Okay, so what this is going to do is going to allow us to use the window.alert function. Okay, so window.alert, as we saw a little bit ago, pops up that message and tells you something, and you can click OK and it goes away. So alert1. Again, this is just a function definition. This won't run until we call the function. So what we can do is we can add a button up here to do that. Okay. Now what we're going to do here is, instead of using an input style button, we're going to use the button element, the button tag itself. Okay. Technically, you are supposed to add the type button to this as well. It will still work if you don't, but it's good practice to add this. So button, type button, and the difference here is that the input control cannot have child content, whereas the button control can, which allows me to do some nicer things like adding in an image, for example. So that is something I can't do with an input button. So if I add an image in here, and then we can go to placekitten.com, and then this will be a small one, so I don't know, 50 by 50. Placekitten.com, there we go. That should work. Okay. Reload the page. And sure enough, now we have a button that has a picture of a kitten inside. Alright. This warning is just because I'm using another website, another URL within my page. Right, and you can read with that. That site uses cookies, and it's just telling me that. Alright, so now we have a button with child content with an image, which is fine, and we want to attach functionality to that. So we can say OnClick again. So the click is the type of event that we want to be looking at. There are lots and lots of different JavaScript events. Click is just one of them. Click means you press down with the mouse and then release with the mouse. Right? That's a full click. There is mouse down, which is just clicking down with the mouse, and there's mouse up as well. So on mouse down, on mouse up. There's also on mouse over, right? On mouse out. So when the mouse leaves something, there's on key press. So lots and lots and lots of different events, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. But for now, we're looking at the onClick event. So what JavaScript function do we want to run with this onClick event? So we want to run this alert1 function, right? So alert1. We can reload the page, click this, it says hello. All right. So now what we want to do is maybe make this more interesting and have another input control that has some text in it. Okay, so input, the type is text, and we want to start it out with no value, and then we'll have some placeholder text. Now this placeholder text is not the same as actually having a value typed in by the user. Okay, so we'll see this. We can reload this. It says enter a name, but it's kind of grayed out. And when I click on it, we see the cursor is there, but I can't highlight this text. As soon as I type something that's darker, right, that's the actual value text. Okay, so placeholder text just is a way to tell people what they should be typing into this. Okay, so you can use that with the input control. So placeholder is the name of the attribute. Okay, so what I want to do is enter a name in here, right? Any name you want. And I'm going to have it, when I click this button, it's going to say, instead of just saying hello, it's going to say hello, and then it's going to grab this HTML element, get the value stored here, right? And then say hello to that name, or whatever the user had typed there, right? So in our alert function, we're going to have to get an element. All right. So previously we used document.getElementById. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get an element get elements by class name. So here we're going to add a class to this input, and we're going to call this name input. Okay, we could easily do this with an ID, but the point is I'm just showing you a different way to grab elements. Okay, so down here in our alert function, we're going to say let element equal document.getElements. So notice the plural here, elements, because you can have multiple elements that have a class name. So this is always going to return a list of elements. So get elements by class name. Okay, and then what is the class name? Well, up here we used name-input. Right, so we want to make sure we use that same class name. Okay, so that should give us an element. All right. So what's interesting now is before we had that error because I declared this variable element twice. Right? I declared it up here, and then when I tried to declare it down here, we got an error. Okay, that's because this is in the global scope of the document. Right? So notice the indentation is all the way at the beginning. And here, when I'm defining element, this is within the context or within the scope of just this function. Okay. So when I do this, the element here, you can define this again, and the context is only within the scope of this function. So this should be allowed, whereas within this function, I couldn't do it twice. It would not like it if I did it twice. Okay, but in a different scope, you can declare the function, or you can declare the variable again. So understanding scope is very important, and we'll get more into that. So right now we get this element by class name, and it's elements, right? So that's plural. So this is going to give us a list of items back, right? And we're just going to take the first one. So in most programming languages, you can access the item of an array by its index using square brackets. Okay, so this should return one element, this element, right? Because this is going to return the first item in that list. And it turns out there's only one item in that list because we only have one HTML element with the class name input. All right. So we're going to grab that element and then we'll console.log it to see, make sure this is working. Element. Reload the page. Click the button. Right? And there it is. Okay, so notice here with the alert, that executes before the console.log executes anything or before the page renders. Okay, so that's important to know. This is one of the few things in JavaScript that can actually pause JavaScript from running on the page. And once you continue, then it'll continue to log things and continue rendering the pages. So the alert is kind of unique in that way. There aren't many things that actually pause the running of JavaScript. All right, so here we get that element, and we saw it logged to the console. We want to get the value from this input. Okay, so remember this value attribute here? That value was initially 0. So what we can do here is we can say hello, comma, and then the first argument there, the alert should add a space between the first and second arguments, and then we'll say element.value. So it's the value of this text box, right? But then we want to add an exclamation point at the end. Okay, so we can reload the page, click it, hello, comma, nothing, because we don't have a name in here. Class name, element.value. I save it. Let's see, what am I missing? Apparently the alert is not like console.log, and it does not take multiple arguments. Okay, so I assumed it was like console.log. You really don't usually use alert very much in the real world. You'll use it occasionally, but it's not very common. So anyway, instead of having 2 arguments to this alert function, we're going to have just 1. So we got rid of that comma and we added everything together, so we need a space here now. So now whatever's inside of here, we'll get that value, right, added to this message. So it'll say hello, comma, and then whatever they typed, and then an exclamation point. Alright, and then we can click that, and it says hello, Alice. Click OK. Alright, so that's all well and fine. If they don't type anything in the box, we can check for that. We can say if not element.value. So if that's the empty string, the not is going to turn it into a Boolean value and take the opposite of that. So in JavaScript, the Boolean version of the empty string is false. So not of false would be true. Right? So if the value is empty, we'll do a different window.alert. And we'll just say hi. If otherwise, else, we'll do this window.alert. And this is the one with the name. So basically, if they have not entered a value into the element, into the input, then we do window.alert hi, and if they have, then we say hello and use that value. So notice the curly brackets specify the code block. Right? We go ahead and indent, but technically in JavaScript you don't have to do that. But in Python, for example, indentation is the code block. There are no curly brackets to designate what code to run inside of this if statement. In Python, you just indent the code. In JavaScript, the indentation doesn't matter as much. It helps for clarity and for other developers to see how your code works, but technically I could do something like this, and that would be perfectly legal because I still have my curly brackets that indicate where the code block is. So I could say if not element.value, execute this code block, else, and then these curly brackets dictate what code block to execute in the else statement. Okay, so we can run this, reload the page, and now it says hi, and then if we put something in here, it says hello Bob. Okay, so that's just kind of an introduction to interactivity, grabbing elements. There's a couple different ways to do it. Document.getElementById, document.getElementsByClassName. Right, we can grab the elements from JavaScript, and then we can manipulate them. We added an inner text, so once we had the element, we can say dot inner text, and we changed the title here. Right. We can also change inner HTML, which we'll get to in a later demo. And then the other thing we learned here is these attributes OnClick. Now there's a number of different events in JavaScript, so let's just search that real quick. Okay, and this is a nice list of a number of different events that you have access to. So on mouse over, on click, on change. On change would be like on a text box. Once you type something and the value has changed, you can execute JavaScript based on that. So JavaScript, especially in the browser, is an event-based model. When something happens, you attach code to that event. So if this happens, do this thing. That kind of idea. If something is clicked on this element, then do this code. Right? That's an event-based model. But there are many more events than this. There's a big list. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go. There's tons and tons of events. So focus means a particular element. When it has focus, it means when you type something in the keyboard, it will type in that control, right? So you can tab through a form and focus on different inputs, right? So on focus, you can do something special when an element is focused. On blur is the opposite of focus, so when it loses focus. Then we have, let's see, down here we'll get to the main ones that we use all the time. Cut, copy, paste. Here's the keyboard events. Key down, key press, key up. So key press is an up and down. And then mouse events, on click, on mouse down, mouse enter, mouse leave, mouse move. So anytime you move the mouse. Mouse over, mouse out, mouse up. So there's a lot of different events, as you can see. Each one of these you can attach functionality to. All right. So understanding that is very important to having a good interactive page. All right. So that is how you access DOM elements from JavaScript.